Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some pretty interesting ideas about time. Our source material is dialogues between the physicist David Bohm
Okay.
and the spiritual teacher J. Krishnamurti.
Sounds like a good pairing.
And they're really grappling with some profound questions about human conflict and suffering. So I'm really curious to see where this takes us.
Yeah, it should be fun. It's an interesting combo, the physicist and the spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they really do go deep into exploring what it means to be human.
Yeah, and to start off, they really delve into this idea of psychological time.
Okay.
Not clock time,
Right.
but like the way we experience time in our minds.
Okay.
You know, it seems like we're always caught between past regrets
Yeah.
and future anxieties. And we never really fully kind of arrive in the present moment.
Right. Always somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Krishnamurti seems to think that this preoccupation with time isn't like some kind of flaw
Okay.
that we have, but it was like a wrong turn
A wrong turn.
that humanity took a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, where we started dividing and separating things, like ourselves from the world, ourselves from each other.
Yeah.
And then we turned that same outward movement inward.
Okay.
So instead of experiencing the world directly,
yeah.
we started to live in this world of thought that we created, you know, and we're constantly striving and becoming,
Right.
reaching for something that's always just out of reach.
Yeah, always chasing after an illusion.
Yeah, exactly. And Bohm even points out that this wasn't driven by bad intentions.
Okay.
He said that we simply didn't know any better.
We didn't know better.
But this wrong turn has led us to the state where our minds are just constantly churning, and it prevents us from experiencing a sense of peace and wholeness.
That makes me think about those moments when I'm completely absorbed in something,
Okay.
like maybe playing music or
Yeah.
being out in nature.
Right.
Time seems to disappear,
Yeah.
and there's just this sense of flow and ease. Is that what it means to step outside of psychological time?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, those moments where you lose yourself in the present
Right.
and there's no sense of like a separate you
Right.
that's striving for something.
Right.
That's a glimpse of what it means to move beyond psychological time.
Okay.
Yeah, Krishnamurti suggests that this state of non-movement,
Yeah, I'm moving.
where there's no becoming, right,
Right.
striving,
Right.
that this is the key to ending the conflict and suffering that we experience.
But how do we get there?
Right.
I mean, if our brains are wired to think in terms of time,
Yeah.
wouldn't ending psychological time be like a monumental task?
It challenges everything we think we know about ourselves and the world. And Krishnamurti even says that,
Yeah.
you know, this isn't something you can achieve through willpower or
Mhm.
force. Even traditional methods like fasting or austerity,
Okay.
he says, have failed to guide people towards this realization.
So how do you guide someone toward an experience that's beyond their current understanding?
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
You can't use the tools of the mind
Right.
to transcend the mind.
Right.
And this leads us to the role of knowledge.
Okay.
Krishnamurti makes a pretty mold statement.
Okay.
He says the moment you use the word knowledge,
Okay.
it implies time.
So to end psychological time, we also need to end knowledge as we experience it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty radical idea,
It is.
especially for someone like Bohm,
Right.
a physicist,
Yeah.
whose world revolves around the pursuit of knowledge.
It creates a really interesting tension between these two viewpoints.
Yeah.
And Krishnamurti doesn't stop at knowledge in general.
Okay.
He specifically points to psychological knowledge as a major obstacle.
Interesting.
He says that by analyzing ourselves,
Okay.
trying to understand our minds,
Yeah.
that actually prevents us from directly observing what's happening.
So we're stuck in this loop
Yeah.
where our desire to know the self
Yeah.
creates more self to know.
That's the challenge.
Yeah. It seems like we can't use knowledge to break free from the limitations of the mind.
But it raises a good question.
Yeah.
If knowledge isn't the answer,
Right.
then what is?
That's a great question. Before we get to that, I want to talk about the role of thought in all this.
Okay.
Does Krishnamurti believe that thought itself is the problem?
Well, he suggests that thought plays a key role
Okay.
in creating this illusion of the me
Okay.
in the first place.
Right.
It's thought that leads to this feeling of separation.
Right.
That we're somehow distinct from the world and each other.
And that sense of separation creates the need for security.
Right.
Which just perpetuates the cycle even more.
Exactly.
To build walls around ourselves.
Yeah.
Both physically and psychologically. Because we feel this fundamental sense of aloneness.
Yeah.
It's like thought is the architect of our own prisons.
And here's a mind-bending twist.
Okay.
He points out that thought itself is a material process. It's happening in the brain.
Interesting.
In the physical world.
So the very thing we're trying to use to understand the world is actually shaping the world we experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit like we're trapped in a hall of mirrors, constantly creating reflections of our own thoughts.
And because we've placed thought on such a pedestal, Krishnamurti says we've become fundamentally irrational.
Even scientists who are supposed to be paragons of logic and reason.
He even says that we have enough rationality to discuss this question.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make us rational beings.
A fascinating paradox.
It really challenges the foundation of our scientific worldview.
Yeah.
If thought itself is inherently limited, if it's part of the problem.
Where does that leave us?
It seems like we need a way to escape the limitations of thought.
Yeah.
To find a way of knowing that's beyond knowledge itself.
And that brings us to the concept of insight.
Okay.
Which might offer a path out of this maze.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we're talking about insight as a way to kind of break free from these limitations of thought and knowledge.
Yeah.
What exactly is insight?
Yeah.
And how does it work?
Well, as Krishnamurti describes it, it's not just like gaining more knowledge or something. It's like this sudden transformative understanding.
Oh, okay.
Like a flash of lightning illuminating a dark landscape.
Okay.
And it shifts your whole perspective, and it can free you from these beliefs and patterns that have been holding you back.
So it's not something that you can learn from a book or like a lecture.
Right.
It's more of like a direct experience.
Exactly.
That shatters the illusions that we've built up.
It's not a gradual process. It's total and immediate.
Oh, wow.
He uses a powerful analogy.
To illustrate this, he says that peace isn't just the absence of violence.
Okay.
It's a completely different state of being.
Yeah, that reminds me of the saying, fighting for peace is like screwing for virginity.
Exactly.
It just doesn't work that way.
Right. And insight is like that. It's not just the absence of ignorance. It's a quality of awareness that completely dispels the darkness.
So how do we cultivate this insight?
Right.
Is it something that we can actively pursue? Or does it just kind of happen spontaneously?
That's where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
Because it's not something that you can force or will into being.
Oh, okay.
Krishnamurti points to something that he calls the ground.
The ground.
Which is a state of emptiness.
Okay.
That's not created by thought.
Okay.
And can't be grasped through knowledge.
Okay, so the ground. This is where I start to feel a little bit lost.
Yeah.
What exactly is the ground?
It's not quite a state of mind or a dimension or like a cosmic energy field or anything like that. But in a way, it encompasses all of those things.
Oh, okay.
You know, imagine those moments of deep meditation where your thoughts kind of quiet down.
Okay.
And you experience this profound stillness and peace.
Right.
That stillness.
Yeah.
That sense of pure presence.
Yeah.
That's a glimpse of what he calls the ground.
So it's a state of being beyond thought.
Yeah.
Beyond knowledge. A place of pure potentiality.
Exactly.
But if it's beyond thought,
right,
how can we possibly understand it?
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
Reaching the ground requires a complete letting go.
Okay.
We have to discard all of the accumulated knowledge and experiences that we use to define ourselves.
So it's like hitting a giant reset button for the brain.
It is.
That sounds terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Yeah.
To just completely let go of everything we think we know.
Yeah.
Our beliefs, our identities, our achievements.
Yeah.
Like a kind of death, isn't it?
In a way it is. He describes it as a shock. A realization that all our efforts, all of our striving are ultimately meaningless.
Wow.
In the context of this ground. And it can be hard to accept, you know?
Right, because we spend so much time and energy building up this sense of self, accumulating knowledge and achievements. To just let all of that go. Feels like falling into an abyss.
It was a radical idea.
Yeah.
But there's also this sense of liberation in it.
Okay.
You know, he says if we can truly let go of everything we've accumulated, then my mind is the ground. Then from there I move. From there, I create society.
It's like starting with a clean slate.
Yeah.
A place of pure creativity and possibility.
Exactly.
But the question remains, how do we actually get there?
That's the central dilemma of all of this.
Yeah.
He seems to be pointing to something that's beyond language.
Okay.
Beyond explanation, beyond any technique or method.
Okay.
And he suggests that maybe the best approach is to do nothing.
Do nothing.
To simply wait and see what happens.
Wait, do nothing? That seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Especially when we look at the state of the world.
Right.
Don't we need to be doing something to make things better?
It is a challenge to let go of our need to control.
Yeah.
To fix.
All right.
To make things happen.
Yeah.
But he argues that this very act of letting go, of surrendering to the unknown, might be the key to unlocking a deeper level of intelligence. An intelligence that arises from the ground itself.
So instead of trying to impose our will on the world, we need to create space for something new to emerge.
Exactly.
Something that's not limited by our preconceived notions of how things should be.
Yeah.
It's about trusting in a process that we don't fully understand.
Exactly. And it brings us back to the idea of insight.
Okay.
He suggests that this transformative energy, this intelligence that arises from the ground, is not limited to any one individual. It's a universal quality that's potentially accessible to everyone.
That's a hopeful thought.
Yeah.
So even if we can't control when or how insight arises, we can create conditions that are more conducive to it.
Yeah.
By letting go of our need to control, by simply being present with what is, we might be opening ourselves up to a deeper level of awareness.
Exactly. It's about cultivating the state of receptivity.
Okay.
A willingness to see things as they are, without judgment or preconceptions.
So how does this relate to the idea of ending psychological time?
Remember those moments you described earlier?
Okay.
Where you kind of lose yourself in the present moment?
Right.
Those glimpses of timelessness?
Right.
They seem to arise spontaneously when the mind is quiet, when we're not caught up in all that chatter of thought.
That makes sense. When we're fully present, there's no past to regret or future to worry about. We're just here now.
And he suggests that this state of presence, this ending of psychological time, is not just a fleeting experience. It's like a fundamental shift in our way of being.
Oh, wow.
It's about aligning ourselves with the ground, with this timeless dimension of existence.
So it's not about trying to stop time or escape from it.
No.
It's about shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
Realizing that we're not bound by time.
Exactly.
In the way that we think we are.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it leads us to this question of how can we live in the world, interact with others, while also being grounded in this timeless awareness?
That's a question that I'm really grappling with.
Yeah.
If we've had these glimpses of a different way of being, how do we integrate that into our daily lives?
That's something we're going to explore further in the last part of our deep dive. It's about bridging the gap between the timeless and the temporal, the ground and the world of form.
So we've talked about psychological time and the ground and the potential for insight to transform our experience. But it feels like a huge leap to go from these like profound concepts to actually living in the world.
Right.
You know, if we've glimpsed this state of timelessness, how do we actually integrate that into our daily lives?
It challenges us to reconcile these two realities. This timeless awareness of the ground and the real demands of living in a world that operates on a very different frequency.
It's like we're straddling two worlds.
Yeah.
On one hand, we have this glimpse of a reality beyond time and suffering.
Right.
But on the other hand, we're still dealing with, you know, jobs and relationships and bills and all the messy complexities of human existence.
It's like we're speaking different languages almost.
Right. And this brings up the question of compassion. How do we relate to others who haven't had this experience? Who are still caught in that cycle of psychological time and suffering? Krishnamurti seems to suggest that true compassion isn't something that we can just manufacture, you know, from our limited minds. It's not about feeling sorry for someone. Or trying to fix their problems.
He says that real compassion can only arise from the ground itself. It's an expression of that fundamental interconnectedness that we experience when we transcend the illusion of a separate self.
So it's less about doing compassionate things. And more about cultivating a compassionate way of being.
Exactly.
But how does that actually play out in real life?
Right.
How do we embody compassion when we can't even explain it to someone who's still kind of trapped in their ego?
Yeah, it's a profound challenge.
Yeah.
And they wrestled with this question throughout their dialogues.
Okay.
Searching for a new form of communication.
Okay.
A way of interacting that doesn't rely on words or concepts.
That makes me think about those times.
Yeah.
When I've been with someone who's going through like a difficult time.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most helpful thing isn't offering advice or trying to cheer them up. It's just being present with them.
Yeah.
Listening without judgment.
That's a great example. Sometimes the most compassionate act is simply holding space for another person's pain.
Right.
Allowing them to feel heard and seen without trying to change them.
Right. And this brings us back to that idea of doing nothing.
Yeah.
You know, Krishnamurti suggests that maybe the best approach is to just wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
But how can that possibly be helpful in a world, that's full of suffering?
It's not about being passive or indifferent to the suffering.
Right.
It's about recognizing the limitations of our ego-driven actions.
Oh. Yeah.
You know? It's about creating a space where a deeper intelligence can operate. An intelligence that's not limited by our preconceived notions of how things should be.
So by letting go of our need to control, by simply being present with what is, we might actually be creating the conditions for a deeper transformation to occur.
Exactly.
Both within ourselves and in the world around us.
And that transformative energy, that intelligence that arises from the ground, isn't limited to a select few individuals. It's a universal quality that's potentially accessible to everyone.
That's a really powerful idea.
It is.
It's like everyone has the potential to tap into this wellspring of wisdom and compassion.
Exactly. And it leads to the final question that these dialogues leave us with. If insight is a universal quality, if it's not something that's just exclusive to a chosen few, then what prevents us from accessing it?
Wow.
And what would happen to humanity if insight became commonplace?
Imagine a world where people weren't constantly caught up in their own self-created dramas. Where conflict and suffering were no longer the norm.
Yeah, what would that world look like?
It's a vision worth contemplating.
It is.
These dialogues really challenge us to not only question the nature of our own minds, but to imagine the possibilities of a world transformed by insight.
Exactly.
It's given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too.